A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to TV shows that deserve the spotlight. So, I feel like we're all having that same little thing in our minds right now. That same feeling of wonder. What am I gonna do next? You know, I've done plenty of shows out there. Some were obscured, some were not, but the thing is, with this next show, I feel like we can all pretty much agree. Tugs. The so-called sister series of Thomas and Friends, since it was in fact made by a good majority of the same creative team that was behind Thomas and Friends years ago. After all, that we know that Britt Allcroft, the original creator of Thomas and Friends, was in fact a live-action show that had a bunch of models racing around certain sets. Practical effects beyond practical effects that we had seen at that time. But of course, we know that it eventually devolved into some kind of animated series. I feel like that with the abundance of CG or animation beyond anything, Thomas and Friends, it was really unfortunate to see how it eventually just collapsed into something that we never would have ever figured could happen. But it did. It did, and it has been doing it long and good. So for almost 20 years, it's just kind of a shame, really. They sold out to Hit Entertainment, which then absorbed into Mattel Creations by 2017. And since then, up until 2021, it became all CG and all that stuff, but it got even worse the following year, 2021. Oh man, all engines go. I'll never talk about that, let alone watch it. But back to Tugs though. Tugs was in fact considered a sister series of TNF, partly for the reasons that it does in fact have Britt Allcroft being involved within the series itself, being that there were similar things going on with production and whatnot, being that it uses a similar live action with models sort of lifestyle. The real big difference though is that instead of a good majority of sets being taken place on land, you have them in sea. And on top of that, it seems that a little more life had been put into the models themselves. As we know, it's a series about tugboats. And this series might not have been as big as Thomas and Friends, but for 1989, it actually did pretty well to at least achieve a good cult following that continues to this very day. And when it comes to the episodes, why don't we go through those real quick? So there you pretty much have that. But I do feel like that there's a couple of things I'd like to address. I'd like to address the comedy, for instance. I feel like that it's a little more ramped up and a little more appropriate given that this is basically a more Seabearer equivalent. And being that Thomas and Friends, especially after Tugs had come and gone, they actually did include a bit more Seabearer related comedy and humor. Like in 2002 when season 6 came around, Salty was introduced. And we know Salty is a dockyard diesel with an iconic pirate-like accent. And it's a cliche that has continued to today. Lots of shows have this thing. The Simpsons, Family Guy, American Dad, and a good majority of others here and there. But Tugs was in fact something beyond all the likes of those Seabearer cliches that we've known up to this very point. And after more than 30 years, it does seem that we are still getting to hear a lot more based on the lore and a good majority of the mystery. I highly would recommend such creators like Leo Kim Video, for instance. And there's even been a few instances of the show actually being recorded and uploaded to YouTube. So that way we can actually watch the show itself for free. So, and for the record, I actually have this playlist here on my channel. If you wanted to go check out the channel itself and the playlist that I've included, Tugs will in fact appear as a publicly shared playlist. It shows all the episodes that were basically on there that anyone could have found and put up there. While not everybody is successful at doing so, I can't quite imagine being able to get a hold of an old show myself have it recorded, and then have it put on a compatible file format, then upload it to the web. Because I can imagine that being a long, complex process. But getting a hold of that stuff doesn't quite seem as easy as it might seem. Anyhow, I'd say this is a pretty good show. Not a show that's exactly Emmy Award winning material, nor did it last that long, but it still does deserve the spotlight for a majority of things. It's got good comedy, it's got some decent suspense and thriller elements put into it. The dialogue is pretty enjoyable most of the time, and I also do like a good majority of the characters, though not at all as memorable as what Thomas and Friends cast has basically done so far. At least up until a certain point when I've abandoned the series altogether. So with that in mind, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time with another instance of TV shows that deserve the spotlight.